good afternoon. And I would also like to welcome everyone to the annual 21st Century Scholarship event hosted by the Wallace Library. Now, today's webinar, the topic is Race and Gender in Scholarship, where we will embark on a discussion on the disparities of race, gender, and ethnicity in scholarly publishing. Today's speakers will address their work, creating and editing journals, collaboratively building training resources tailored to different audiences in the scholarly publication or publishing community, and administering research efforts in a STEM-focused college. And as Frances mentioned at the outset, I am Laverne McQuiller-Williams, Interim Dean of the College of Liberal Arts here at RIT, and will be serving as today's moderator. Now, today's event will take place in a webinar format. Each panelist will be asked to speak for 15 minutes, and the remainder of the session will be available for a question and answer period. We will be taking questions at the end of the session, but please feel free to type in your questions into the Q&A feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen as we go along. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce today's panelists. First, we have Jocelyn Dawson, Project Leader for Toolkits for Equity and Journals Marketing Manager at Duke University Press. Next, we have Rebecca Sumner, Assistant Dean for Research in the College of Engineering Technology, RIT. And finally, we have Seretha Williams, Professor of English and Women and Gender Studies at Augusta University, and editor of Third Stone Journal on Afro-Futurism. So please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. I will now ask each panelist to provide a little more information about themselves and their work in the areas of race, ethnicity, and gender in scholarship. And I will invite Jocelyn Dawson to begin.
Hi, I hope everyone can hear me. I'm going to share my screen here. Does it look good? My name is Jocelyn Dawson, and I work at Duke University Press. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And before we get started, I want to acknowledge that Duke University sits on the occupied land of the Shakori and Catawba people. So I'm part of the Toolkits for Equity project, which was started to create tools that could construct an anti-racist framework for scholarly publishing. The project includes 3 toolkits, one for allies, one for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and one for organizations. The Allies Toolkit launched in August, and it's what I'll be talking about today. The other 2 toolkits are still in progress. I was joined in this work by my co-organizers, Nicole Coggins, Melanie Dalachek, Gisela Fossato, and over 50 volunteers. So to start off, I want to share a bit about the landscape of scholarly publishing and the problem we're trying to address. In 2018, on the blog, The Scholarly Kitchen, there was a 2-part blog post published called On Being Excluded, Testimonies by People of Color in Scholarly Publishing. And I want to share 2 of these testimonies. During a diversity training at the press, we were asked when we first realized what our racial identity was. A middle-aged white woman at the press turned to me and laughed. "Well, you probably came out of the womb knowing." Her exclamation made clear to me how white people assume that they are the default and that they are the only people without a racialized identity. Of course, I did not come out of the womb knowing that I was brown, and instead learned that I was brown sometime in elementary school through comments like this one and treatment that made me feel othered. Editors took many non-Black interns under their wing, and they were given numerous opportunities to rise up in the press. Black interns, on the other hand, were heavily micromanaged, and there was little interest in bonding with them or making them feel at home. I saw several white interns elevated to permanent positions. This is something I never saw offered as a possibility to Black interns. I did my best to provide some sense of belonging to the Black interns when I could, but honestly, how could I provide a feeling of belonging if it was something I never felt there myself? And here's a little bit about the data. So in 2016, the journal Learned Publishing published a survey showing that the scholarly publishing workforce is 91% white. Lee and Low Books, a children's book publisher, has been conducting a diversity baseline survey for the industry, which includes trade publishers. And their most recent 2019 survey showed that the workforce was between 74 and 85% white. And this is primarily for 3 reasons. So the first reason is that for white people, our personal networks tend to be overwhelmingly racially homogenous, so that when we share job postings with only our networks, the problem compounds. Number 2, historically publishing has relied on the labor of unpaid interns and low-paid entry-level positions, which precludes people without economic advantages. And 3, hiring organizations then prioritize applicants with previous industry experience, like these internships, rather than those with transferable skills. So those of us who started the Toolkits project had been encouraged in recent years by the number of diversity, equity, and inclusion committees that had started around our profession and the work that they were doing. So our project started out of a belief that these groups' work could get a kind of kickstart if we were able to provide training resources that would help transform workplace culture. Our toolkits were inspired by the American Alliance of Museums Guides for Transgender Inclusion. We encourage everyone to check out their guides. You'll notice on the slide that AAM has a coworkers guide, an institutions guide, and a transitioning professionals guide, which we've then mimicked with our toolkit for allies, organizations, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And our toolkits are founded in the work of, are founded on anti-racism work by the Racial Equity Institute and the group Allies for Change. So what do we mean by an anti-racist framework for scholarly publishing? Here's a definition by Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. An anti-racist is one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. One who's expressing the idea that racial groups are equals and none needs developing and is supporting policy that reduces racial inequity. So an anti-racist in publishing is actively working to challenge white supremacy in the workplace and dismantle racial inequities. And this is what we want to see happen across our industry. So Dr. Beverly Daniel Tatum, in her book, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria, really gets at the heart of why we chose to use an anti-racism framework. She uses the metaphor of a moving walkway at the airport. Active racist behavior is equivalent to walking fast on the conveyor belt. The person engaged in active racist behavior has identified with the ideology of white supremacy and is moving with it. Passive racist behavior is equivalent to standing still on the walkway. No overt effort is being made, but the conveyor belt moves the bystanders along to the same destination as those who are actively walking. Some of the bystanders may feel the motion of the conveyor belt, see the active racist ahead of them, and choose to turn around, unwilling to go to the same destination as the white supremacists. But unless they are walking actively in the opposite direction at a speed faster than the conveyor belt, unless they are actively anti-racist, they will find themselves carried along with the others. Being actively anti-racist means building trust and leaning into difficult conversations. It's about soul-searching, truth-telling, relearning history, and connecting with our colleagues in authentic ways. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Guide for Allies. So we started with the Guide for Allies, which is a guide intended primarily for white people, because especially in an industry as white as scholarly publishing, white people doing their own work to recognize and dismantle white supremacy is critical for meaningful change. We've been really pleased with the reception that the guides have received, or that the guide has received. It's been viewed more than 4,000 times since it was released August 6th. And I think that the sort of reception shows how badly these tools were needed. So what's in the toolkit? So in the appendix, we include a chronology of white supremacy in the United States. We felt it was really important to include a full catalog of the many laws, bills, and historical markers that have created the system of structural racism in the United States. We also include lists of sample equity and inclusion programming from our peers across the scholarly publishing industry, as well as examples of affinity groups at various organizations. And we also include a list of recommended training organizations that we know use an anti-racism framework. Then our guide outlines 5 steps to becoming an ally. The first step is to become conscious of white advantage. When many of us think about inequality, we often turn our focus to marginalized groups. But what about trying to see the advantages that dominant groups hold? The work of seeing the advantages granted by white supremacy is a crucial step to seeing whiteness. One of the tools we recommend for seeing the advantages of the dominant culture is Peggy McIntosh's Invisible Knapsack. It's a useful tool to help you unpack the advantages of white supremacy. It can be easily Googled, and here are a couple of examples. If I should need to move, I could be pretty sure of renting or purchasing housing in an area which I can afford and in which I would want to live. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can turn on the television or open to the front page of the paper and see people of my race widely represented in a positive light. For those of us who are white, coming to terms with white advantage does the following. It allows us to start seeing all the advantages that have contributed to our situation in life. And it allows us to start noticing racial dynamics on a regular basis. Once we learn to always notice race, who's in the room, who is not, who's at the table, who is speaking, who holds power, we can start to be aware of our own role in these situations. Step 2 is to listen to people of color without judgment or defensiveness. And we recommend the LARA approach for receiving and giving feedback. This was shared with us by our colleagues at Princeton University Press, sort of an active listening model. L is to listen with the goal of developing empathy for the speaker. You set aside your own perspective. A, affirm with the goal of building connection. R, respond with the goal of addressing the speaker's questions or concerns directly. And then A, ask questions or add information with the goal of furthering our understanding of the speaker's point of view. So with this approach, the speaker is the focus and the listener is really there to sit with what they're saying. And how to respond to criticism. This is something that might come up when doing this work. So if you get feedback that you've misstepped, you acknowledge what went wrong and you avoid using conditional words like but or if. You avoid making excuses. Thank the person for bringing the mistake to your attention. And then don't apologize just with words, but actually change your behavior and do what you can to mitigate the impact of the mistake. Step 3 is to move out of social segregation and develop truth-telling relationships of accountability. So this section of the toolkit emphasizes that becoming trustworthy allies is something that white people cannot do on our own. It's work that must be done with humility and in partnership with our BIPOC colleagues. Otherwise, it's likely that we'll do more harm than good. There's a tendency to replicate old patterns of missionary zeal through a white savior complex and run the risk of jeopardizing the people that white people are presuming to help. Moving out of social segregation will require intentionality because so many of our communities and workplaces have been segregated for so long. Our series editors are white, our freelancers are white, our vendors are predominantly white. And this might mean experiencing discomfort and reaching out to communities across difference. And some of the actions we recommend for people on scholarly communications. So one is before conference travel, consider who you're reaching out to for meetings and meals. Make an effort to diversify this group. Then check in with your coworkers if you think you've witnessed or committed a racialized microaggression in the workplace. This might not be easy, especially at first, but receiving feedback in this way can lead to personal growth and relationship building. And then if a BIPOC colleague raises a concern that's ignored or dismissed by the group, circle back to amplify their statement. A few more actions. So if an author requests a style or a spelling that doesn't follow our usual copy editing guidelines, for example, retaining Chinese characters for place names throughout a text in English, make sure that the copy editor knows to respect the author's preference. And then post all jobs and internships publicly and interview at least 3 candidates who have the skills to learn the job. As I mentioned earlier, this is a tough one for an industry where many people from economic privilege gain beneficial experience through unpaid internships or low-paid entry-level jobs. And we know that work must be done to create on-ramps for people without those advantages. And then step 4, take action to interrupt racism and white advantage at all levels. So bystander intervention is one tactic for doing this. When racial harm is done in the workplace, the involvement of bystanders plays a key role in reducing trauma. So one study from the group iHollaback showed that even when a bystander exchanges a knowing glance with a victim, it helps to reduce the impact of these incidents. But we want readers of our toolkit to go further. We want them to engage colleagues when they misstep and offer support to individuals experiencing harassment. If you're in a situation where this happens, give the individual being targeted a chance to respond. If they're not prepared to respond and it's safe for you to do so, directly address the offender. And then afterwards, check in with the individual who was targeted, ask them how they're doing, what you can do to help. Could you create documentation? Could you reach out to the offender? There's a bunch of different tactics that can be used in bystander intervention, and you can find more at the iHollaback site. And then finally, step 5 is to create work communities where everyone thrives. We want to replace a culture of perfectionism, which is an aspect of white supremacy, with a culture of appreciation and growth. Here's a quote from Tema Okun. Develop a culture of appreciation where the organization takes time to make sure that people's work and efforts are appreciated. Develop a learning organization where it is expected that everyone will make mistakes and that those mistakes offer opportunities for learning. And then if you want to read more about how white supremacy functions in the workplace, you can search for Tema Okun and white supremacy culture. And there's a handout from the site Dismantling Racism that is really useful. So C4DISC, which is the Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications, is hosting our toolkits on their site. So you can go to that site to download a copy. If you've got feedback, please feel free to reach out to us at equitytoolkits@gmail.com. We're also recruiting volunteers for the next 2 toolkits. You can go to the C4DISC website, go to the section for working groups, and there's a volunteer application. You could specify whether you are interested in the organizational toolkit or the BIPOC toolkit. And we're hoping to kick off the work on these 2 guides in the coming months. And that's it for me. So I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you, Jocelyn. I will now ask Rebecca Sumner to start her presentation.
Okay, there we go. Apologies. Thank you. So thank you all. Thank you for the opportunity to be here to tell you a bit about the work that's been going on in engineering technology. I have been in the College of Engineering Technology at RIT for about 5 years, I believe now. And it's a new position that I stepped into. I came to this from sponsored research. I am not an engineer. My training is in English literature. So what was clear to me at the start was that there was a lot of great work going on in the college, and it's the result of a lot of people all across the university who have been pursuing opportunities for women faculty to build their careers and to advance their research expertise. So starting in 2008, a team of faculty at RIT put together a Catalyst grant, and it was designed to really seed the work that became the Advance project. And Advance was a transformational grant that RIT received in order to develop a network for female faculty to build their career, to support retention, to help them with advancing in their career in tenure, leadership roles, and additional resources. So this did not happen overnight. 2008 to 2012 was the period of performance for effort. And then, I will not go through all of this, but you see the research questions. It's focused on 6 colleges initially: computing, science, engineering technology, engineering, and mathematics. And where possible, we extended the focus to include the 2 remaining colleges at RIT, Liberal Arts and Business. It was a great opportunity for faculty in my college, especially, to begin to engage with their colleagues across the university and to find opportunities to build to this larger initiative. So effort was funded at the level of about $200,000 from the National Science Foundation. Advance was a much larger grant that engaged the university and was supported at about $3 million. So from 2012 to 2018, this was supported by the National Science Foundation with additional resources from RIT. And now it is a self-supporting office that is part of RIT. And actually the leader of Advance now is one of the faculty from Engineering College, or from College of Engineering Technology. The goal, to increase representation, retention, career advancement of women in STEM. And was really focused on long-term changes that would transform the community at RIT. It was collaborative, it was cross-college, and it involved many, many people. So it was not something that happened in isolation, and it was also something that has been a priority of the university. So a few of the lasting impacts of Advance before, and we'll come back to some of these, and then I'd like to talk to you a little bit and show you some charts about progress that has been happening at RIT as a result of Advance funding. A couple of the lasting impacts: Connect grants, which are small seed grants. So far, there have been about 111 of those awarded. The average dollar amount is very small, just over $5,000. Every college has received these grants, and they do make a difference. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about how this has made a difference in our college in particular. So here is where RIT has been from 2010 to 2016. So 2010, remember, we were still in the middle of that effort award, and 2012 is where we really started to see some of the work of Advance be funded, and some of those initial initiatives continued. Percentage of women in tenure track faculty, it has been, it's going up slightly, but by and large, it's due to a decrease in the number of men who are employed at RIT, not so much that there's been a significant increase in the number of women. You see it was 244 to 549 in 2010. 2016, 246, but 499. So the things are changing, but the story is somewhat mixed in some instances. Percentage of women among tenure track faculty in predominantly STEM colleges. I should explain, Engineering Technology has been renamed. It used to be the College of Applied Science and Technology. So you can see the numbers of women faculty have really changed slightly in the STEM colleges. Tenure track faculty have gone up slightly, but not significantly. And in, for example, the Golisano Institute for Sustainability, there's very little change. It's actually gone down. In engineering, Kate Gleason College of Engineering, that's where we saw the biggest uptick in the number of women faculty. So, and I should say also, all of this information is courtesy of Advance. So they have been tracking all of these metrics. These are the non-STEM colleges where you see pretty significant change in the number of women faculty. Most of them have gone up, with the exception of NTID, which has gone down slightly. And the percentage of women among tenure and tenure track faculty by rank. There's been a slight increase in the number of full professors who are women. Again, these numbers are slight. The percentage of women among full professors by NSF designation in STEM disciplines, you can see that there's effectively no change. and among full professors in predominantly STEM colleges. Applied science and technology, so we had a slight change over time, but the numbers are very small, 6, 5, 10, 5, 4, 6, 4, and 5. So you see the disparity between full professors. The numbers are very small, very few women full professors. In non-STEM colleges, it's slightly different. Oh, pardon me. So all of these non-STEM colleges, the NTID has gone down, but all of the other colleges there's been a significant uptick in the number of women professors in non-STEM colleges. And finally, female endowed professors. The numbers, it's decreased slightly in terms of headcount, and then it began to trend upward beginning in around 2012. The numbers, again, are still quite small. When we get to total promotions, which really goes to the issue of retention, job satisfaction, opportunities elsewhere, the total hires have started to go up. There's some variation over time, but the numbers are still, again, quite small. 9 out of 21 in 2016. Percentage of female promoted over total promoted. As you can see, the number has sort of varied, and again, quite small. Tenured, out of total tenured, 57%. So this number is one that we see trending upward. Total departures. And one of the things that some colleagues and I have been talking about too in the wake of COVID, and the fact that pre-tenure faculty are being given, understandably, the chance to defer their standing for tenure. What that does is keep them as assistant professors for longer. So it's sort of a double-edged sword. So I do not know what this will look like, but that's something that I think we need to be mindful of as we think about how we're supporting our faculty. So where did this end up for us in engineering technology? So in 2017, there was a small Connect grant that we were awarded. It was $2,000 for 1 year. 5 female faculty and I met together. 3 were tenured, 2 tenure track. One of the tenured faculty was a department chair, and she was really instrumental, not only in developing advance and working in that, but also in participating in this group. So the goal really was to build research expertise, to build community so people felt like they were not alone and they had colleagues and they could get support from the dean's office as well. We had external support from a senior scholar. She was also not in STEM, but we met monthly and she presented workshops, and we had some specific targeted exercises, and we formed a small kind of ad hoc writing group. To date, since then, these 5 people have submitted 25 proposals as PI or co-PI and have brought in over $1 million in external funding. And of note, one of these was an NSF STEM proposal that provides scholarship dollars to economically disadvantaged, academically talented students. And our proposal has focused on women undergraduates. So I like the fact that this is sort of the faculty's way of paying it forward and extending some of the community that they have gotten as a result of advance and as a result of effort and as a result of the support from the administration, from our dean's office. So it has been a great opportunity for people to to learn, and also for some faculty who were not very active in scholarship to begin to develop their own identity as scholars. So thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And finally, I will invite Seretha Williams to share her work in this area.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm so glad to be on this call and look forward to actually coming up to RIT when we can all visit in person again. So I wanted to start off my talk by just kind of talking about how I got to the point that I was co-founding a journal. And it's through my research on Margaret Walker. So I do literature and I study Margaret Walker, and I'm currently working on a book on Margaret Walker. Her unpublished manuscript is Goose Island. And this is an interesting fact and kind of relevant to what we're talking about here today. So when she was a young woman working on the Federal Writers Project in Chicago, she was working alongside Richard Wright and some other notables who've become a part of the Chicago Black Renaissance. And Richard Wright goes away. And she's still friends with him and giving some kind of, I don't know, research assistance to him for his book that would become Native Son. And at the same time, Margaret Walker is working on this manuscript that is informed by her experience walking around the neighborhoods on the north side of Chicago. So there's a lot of scholarship about African Americans on the south side of Chicago, but not on the north side of Chicago. So she was interested in this, and so she's writing this manuscript. And at the same time, she's sending pieces of news stories to Richard Wright for his book that would, again, become Native Son. And his book comes out, and Margaret shelves Goose Island. And she just says, you know, it's not good, I don't like it. He's already done what I was trying to do with this, and the manuscript is just sitting. So they have this manuscript at the Margaret Walker Center at Jackson State University. And along with a lot of her, she was a great journalist, so they have all of her papers there. And looking through her papers and then reading her essays, I found that it was really so difficult for her as a scholar coming of age in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s, the 1960s, and then even the 1970s, because her career extends that long. And one of the things that she talks about is the problem of sexism and racism. And people held the fact that she was a mother against her and did not allow her to really kind of publish or have access to being able to publish or some of the resources. And so she was constantly kind of talking about that. And in her essay collections, this is a theme that just keeps coming up. And so the reason why I bring up Margaret Walker is because she does something about it. She says, I'm going to start an institute. And that's exactly what she does. And she uses some of the money from her publications, especially Jubilee, to fund this institute for the study of African-American culture, life, history. And that center is still in existence today, and it's the Margaret Walker Center. And a lot of her archives are online, so after this talk, you can feel free to go over there and just kind of look through that archive to see some of the things that she was talking about. So what she did was like institution building, and this is the way that we get over. This is the way that we, and I'll talk about kind of decolonizing the academy, that we have to create our own institutions, right? And so that's kind of a framework that I wanted to give to my talk today. So we know that academic journals exist to inform researchers and practitioners of the latest discussions, discoveries, and developments in the discipline. However, the cost of subscriptions to Elsevier and other academic databases makes gaining access to information difficult, if not impossible. Academic research libraries all over the United States are making tough decisions about which serials to include in their collections. And we have evidence that many of the journals under consideration for culling are in the arts and humanities and will disproportionately affect researchers studying issues of race, ethnicity, gender, and sexuality. Academic libraries are great advocates for open access peer-reviewed journals, and most scholars today recognize the value in peer-reviewed open access journals. Yet, the perception persists that open access journals are not equivalent to those established serials protected behind the gates of academic publishing industry. So here's some questions. What if we open the academy? What if we imagine a different system for presenting information and sharing knowledge? What would happen if we made a journal a living artifact with continuous publishing? These questions and more sparked the development of Third Stone, the journal I edit. Third Stone Journal is the manifestation of almost 2 decades of conversations between Myrtle Jones and myself. We have known each other since forever, our paths diverging and intersecting throughout the years. Our check-in conversations began with, "How are you?" and ended with the perils of academic publishing. In 2018, Myrtle and I decided we wanted to work together on a project that would be disruptive, innovative, open sourced, multidisciplinary, and multimodal. Myrtle's content area is in digital and print media, and my primary content area is in world literature and women's studies. We are seemingly worlds apart. However, because I was in the throes of teaching myself about digital humanities tools and methodologies and earning a degree in library and information sciences, our interests intersected at the digital possibilities for creating a space in which scholars, artists, and activists could come together in intellectual community beyond the paywall of traditional journals and academic databases. The industry experts we consulted instructed us to find the gap, to identify the specific need in academic publishing we would need. Our initial goal was to create a free journal, free for contributors and for a public audience. Additionally, as we continue to think through our vision for a liberated and unfettered creative and critical space, we decided that Afro-Futurism, or the Black speculative arts, aligned best with our publishing and social justice aspirations. We understand Afro-Futurism to be an aesthetic and critical approach that Black identifying creators embrace and apply to their art, their technologies, and their socio-political activities. Afro-Futurism, in its many incarnations, is informed by Black diasporic experiences, past, present, and future. Scholars, including Itasha Womack, Kenitra Brooks, Isaiah Lavender, and many others, are professionalizing our engagement with the Black fantastic, making us aware that Afrofuturism offers all of us an alternative model of knowledge production. Thus, the content in the form of our publication align with our vision, and our open access through RIT's ScholarWords platform helps us to fill the gap in scholarly publishing. Third Stone Journal intends to provide multimodal content, serve as a hub for Black PH, promote public history and humanities, build networks of scholars, practitioners, and activists, create an epistemological meeting space for Black liberation, advocate for the rights of digital authors and creators, and influence pedagogy, curricula, and canon. In the inaugural issue, we published visual art by Patrice Gaskins, Abdi Farah, and Rick Banks, poetry by Cheryl Hodgson and Donald Vincent, music by activist Leah Smith, and a critical essay by Christopher Marlack. We also established a recurring section called Continuing the Conversation, which invites responses to the pieces included in each issue. The Continuing Conversation section also includes a call for annotated bibliographies on Afro-Futurist artifacts. So the purpose of the Living Bibliography is to curate a critical conversation about Black speculative primary and secondary sources. In this respect, we envision the journal as a hub and an archive. Simultaneously, we encourage and support the creation of new work, and we mine and curate cultural artifacts that may not have received critical treatment. Our undergraduate interns add to our list of works to annotate, and Clarissa West White, an academic librarian and scholar, serves as the content editor for the bibliography. For our second issue, which we're in the process of developing, we have collaborated with Afro-Futurism, What Is It Sound, a conference curated by Julian Chambliss of the Zora Festival in Eatonville. And we're going to be able to promote the bibliography through that partnership. So conference contributors have agreed to submit entries on sonic Afro-Futurist artifacts, and the entries will provide a scholarly context for the conversations taking place during the virtual sessions of the conference. The entries should be succinct and intellectually accessible for the generalist and non-academic audience. Thus, accessibility is a hallmark of equity in scholarly publishing and central to the mission of Third Stone. I would argue that a broad understanding of accessibility is integral to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I suggest that by situating pop culture pieces next to scholarly pieces, practitioners next to academics, and visual art next to text next to tech, that we make knowledge accessible and equitable. We break down false boundaries between the arts and reject the categorization of thought and creativity as high or low. We also allow contributors to use a citation and format style that aligns with their subject or discipline. Imposing a singular style guide is an obstacle to publication, especially for non-academics, and we will work with them on citations and format. Moreover, by creating an editorial board of senior and junior scholars, practitioners, students, activists, and publishers, Third Stone serves as a virtual place for the proverbial meeting of the minds. At least that's our vision. We are at the beginning of this process to build a better journal. Our long-term goal is to make creative and scholarly research accessible by paying our contributors, peer reviewers, and editorial staff for their labor. Third Stone stands in solidarity with others who push back on the status quo and barriers that prevent women and Black and Indigenous people of color from participating in intellectual and creative communities. Decolonizing the Academy, the collection edited by Carol Boyce Davies, Meredith Gatsby, Charles F. Peterson, and Henrietta Williams, lays out a resistance-centered strategy for re-engaging with the Academy as a transformative site of knowledge and creative productivity. Kristen A. Smith's hashtag Cite Black Women and Nika Denny, Donna McCrae Godfrey, and Jacinta Saffold's founding of the Black Women's Studies Association are two contemporary examples of resistance and advocacy. And so I wanted to make sure that I included the fact that, this is about really kind of creating a sense of community and breaking down the barriers. And when I was, asked to talk about this whole notion of equity, I was thinking about, so what exactly is Third Stone's like vision and mission? And it does boil down to this whole idea of making art, making knowledge accessible for everyone. And I wanted to expand my understanding of what accessibility was. Thank you.
Thank you, Seretha. Now, again, I want to thank all of our panelists for joining in this fantastic. I'm sorry, I see that I was muted. Okay. Can I be heard now? Just people can just nod. Thank you. Well, again, I want to thank all of our panelists for the fantastic presentations today. We will now open up the floor for questions. There is a Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to place your questions there, and we will get to them in the order that they are received. While you are working on those questions, I can start with a question to our panelists. And that will be, how do current events or the current political climate affect how these disparities, the disparities of race, gender, and ethnicity, are perceived? Who would like to take that question first?
Oh, yeah, I can start unless one of you would like to.
Yes, please do, Jocelyn.
Yeah, I would say that when we started our Toolkits project, we really weren't sure how much buy-in we'd get from folks sort of at the organizational level, kind of the higher ups, if there would be kind of discomfort with like an active anti-racist framework with like naming white supremacy. And I think especially if with the current events about, after the murder of George Floyd and the increased attention to racial injustice in the US, I think that we're more confident that the problem is visible, and that when we launch our organizational toolkit, that we'll see broader adaptation, that organizations know it's not enough to have a blanket diversity statement, that there has to be active work done. So so I don't know that I properly answered your question, but I think that's one way in which sort of the attention to these inequities has impacted our project.
Thank you.
I'll answer that also, and just kind of give an example from what's going on.
Oh, Seretha, you accidentally muted yourself.
It is muting me. I don't know. Hold on.
Sorry, I was trying to spotlight you and I hit mute by accident.
Okay. All right. No problem. So here at Augusta University, I'm the advisor for our Black Student Union, and the students were very upset by the events, the police brutality. In Georgia, we had an actual, not a police brutality incident. Well, we had that too, but another incident in which a Black man was murdered, just kind of being in a neighborhood. And we actually had some students from that community. And so the students were really upset about it. And they decided to submit a list of demands. Now, what's interesting is that they've been talking about like the lack of diversity in faculty, the lack of diversity in curriculum, but they hadn't really acted on it in such a public official kind of a way. And so this current moment really did invigorate them to stand up and to speak out on all of these issues that I think that they were already experiencing. And so they did send that. And as a result of their actions, our university is having these conversations and talking about the need to have diversity training, and not just for students, not just for faculty, but all the way up to the president of the university. And I don't know that we would have had that, we would have had these things happening had it not been for this particular political climate. And I'm really grateful that we are at least being courageous enough to have these conversations. I've been at this university since 1998, and I can tell you that this is the first time that we've had sustained conversations about gender diversity, racial diversity, LGBTQ diversity. And so it really is fascinating. I don't know where it's going to go, but I just wanted to acknowledge that in this moment, in this space, there are lots of conversations being had about diversifying at least the academy from that perspective.
Thank you. Rebecca?
And I would just like to say that in our college, it's not just that we have been talking about issues of diversity, but we're concerned about the anti-science mode that political discourse has begun to take. And I think we feel a particular obligation, especially to our students. Engineering technology has a high percentage of first-generation students. So these are not necessarily the ones who would typically have gone into a path of engineering as it's typically constructed. So for us, it's equity in education and opportunity for all of our students is really important. And to do so in the context of anti-science rhetoric is, I think we all find a certain urgency to that too.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, I'll be going to the first question in the Q&A feature. And that states, Kate Gleason was an accomplished female engineer, businesswoman, and philanthropist from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. She was an advocate for women's suffrage and equal rights for women in engineering majors. Here at RIT, our College of Engineering is named after her. However, there exists a ratio of male to female to be approximately 4:1. What can we as an RIT community do to foster more cultural opportunities that are more equitable to women and minorities, like Hispanics and people of color, to alleviate this major divide here at RIT?
I could speak to that a little bit. For example, I know RIT has a partnership with Rochester Prep, a charter school in town that whose demographics are identical to that of the demographics in the city of Rochester. Rochester as a city has, I think, some of the worst childhood poverty in the nation. And it is a city in which Black and Brown students do not excel. And by giving them an opportunity at Rochester Prep to then partner with RIT, we are hopeful that we can broaden the diversity of the students who matriculate to RIT and into all of the colleges, including Kate Gleason. And yes, she was a trailblazer. And I know engineering technology, we have Women in Technology as an organization to support female students. There's the Society of Women Engineers. There are a number of other organizations that we have to support students, but some of it is getting them to the point where they want to come here and they are qualified to take the tests and be successful. We want to admit students who are not going to fail, and we want them to be able to learn and feel that there is a place for them here and that engineering is a career that is viable for them.
Thank you, Rebecca. Jocelyn or Seretha, did you want to also address that question?
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Seretha?
I'll just say that, just from a faculty perspective, one of the things that would be very helpful is to make sure that you have mentoring in place. And then also just making it seem like a place to go. If you look at your website and it doesn't seem very diverse or very inclusive, then people may not even apply to that. And so, the visual is real. And so I just think you have to be intentional about saying like, no, really, we want you to come, and not just in a symbolic way, but to really be intentional about it. And I don't know the makeup, or, I don't know the programs that RIT has, but I know that having a Black Faculty and Staff Association is something that could, or other identity kinds of affinity groups would maybe help people find a sense of community there. So it's not enough to just kind of hire people, that you have to actually put some things in place so that they can feel that they can be successful. And I know, and I've been here at my institution for a very long time, but I can tell you that there was nothing in place here to help me be successful. And as a matter of fact, the first time I went up for tenure and promotion, I was denied. So even though everybody was telling me, oh, you're doing a great job, you're doing, so well, and then those kinds of things happen. And so some people can fall in between the cracks. And if you're not intentional in making sure that you're checking in with those faculty that you've hired and you've invested in, right? Because like paying a salary and research money and all of those kinds of things, that's an investment. Then of course, yeah, they're gonna go somewhere else where they can feel that they will be supported. And so I would just say, having some things in place before you're hiring would probably help a lot, working towards retention of diverse faculty.
Thank you, Seretha. And I think that's an excellent segue to the next question that was posted. And that is, in an environment like higher education where change takes so long, example, hiring new tenure track faculty only takes place when someone leaves, what are some thoughts on ways we can make immediate and meaningful changes to diversity, inclusivity, equity, and justice?
To build on what Seretha was saying, I think, we really have to focus on making the culture welcoming. So like Seretha said, affinity groups, so having space to have discussions around equity and inclusion. So book discussions, trainings, film viewings, because, unless you're actually actively changing the workplace culture, the pipeline programs, the hires that you make, they're not going to matter, because your environment's not going to be one that people want to stay in. So I think not only investing budget, but also just investing time at Duke University Press, we're able to spend at least 4 hours a month working on equity and inclusion. And we've had our efforts sort of staff-led at first. Now we have the support of our director, but they've just exploded. We have at least a quarter or a third of the press is actively engaged in this work, coming up with ideas. There's we started off as one equity and inclusion group, and now there's like 4 or 5 different working groups working on different aspects of it. So I think, giving staff the time and also empowering them to pursue these projects, I think is one way that you can sort of kickstart those efforts.
I'll say also maybe reviewing promotion and tenure guidelines that you have. I know that people have articulated some concerns over the fact that where they publish their scholarship is not valued because it's not in maybe like the mainstream kinds of places. And so that would be something that you could maybe review, maybe making the promotion and tenure guidelines, very clear. Sometimes there's a lack of clarity to those guidelines, and that could be another thing that you can actually do right now before you even hire people. Just imagine, what needs to be in place to make them successful, and then have these real conversations, and maybe even have a way of reporting bias, because a lot of places don't necessarily have like a formal way to report bias. We have our Title IX offices, but that's not necessarily where incidents of prejudice or discrimination go, depending on, the kind of discrimination. And so I would say maybe having a specific kind of way to report instances of bias would be a good idea and something you can do now.
Thank you. Rebecca, did you want to add?
Some of this goes back to a lot of the work that our advanced team has done, and our Office of Diversity and Inclusion has been really important in terms of making these conversations something that we should be having and we need to have. It's as with the previous question, things do take time though, and to get people to buy in, I think, is often a matter of incremental progress.
Thank you. Now, I do not see any additional questions in the question and answer. However, I do have some prepared just in case this was going to happen. But please, others in the audience, please feel free to include questions in that feature. And while we're waiting, my next question is, how would you rate where your institutions are for awareness of issues in race and gender equity in publishing? Who would like to start?
I'll start. I think we're at the very beginning of having this conversation. We went for a number of years without our Office of Diversity and Inclusion being open. And so in that interim, people were really upset about not having a place to go, not having leadership on that. But now we have that person in place, and we're making some strides towards it. I don't know. Our problem is that we have a lot of women in a lot of different areas, and we are connected to the Medical College of Georgia. We have the Dental College of Georgia here as well. And so I think that probably on that side of our campus, maybe women are not as well represented. But the biggest problem is in leadership positions, that we don't have a lot of women in those leadership roles. And so that's a conversation that we're having. And we have very few people of color in those leadership roles as well. And so we're at the beginning of a conversation, and I'm glad that we are having this conversation, because we absolutely have probably fewer people of color in leadership roles now than we did when I first started here in 1998. And so that kind of aligns with what Rebecca was talking about in that research, that we have these kind of ebbs and flows, and we need to do a better job of thinking about, like, how are we retaining and how are we growing, and are we just not having those positions? And that's why it looks like things are becoming more equitable, like what's really going on in these situations. And in terms of publishing, one of the things that we are doing, and I'm in the humanities side of the campus, and so we are underfunded, but our former dean did a lot to try to get what we call RISCA money to support us. So that's research and creative activity money, so that we can actually do some work like that. And so I can see that in my college, that there are a lot of women having access to that money and publishing. One of my colleagues, she just published a book. She had that grant 2 years ago. I got it last year, and I'm working on my book as well. And so, I just think you have to have some funding in order for people to be able to develop. And, I'm in an interim department chair role, and I think it's really important to give people the opportunity to develop and to grow. And we did not get professional development at my institution, but this is something that is now happening, right? And I think that we just see that we have to invest in our people for them to stay. Otherwise, they get what they get, and then they go somewhere else.
Thank you. Jocelyn or Rebecca?
Sure, yeah, so at Duke University Press, we publish about 150 books a year in around 60 academic journals. So on the book side, we were actually in the position of being a leader in publishing critical race theory, being a leader in publishing queer studies. So our list of authors has been very diverse, and it's the staff then that we need to make sure reflects the work that we're putting out into the world. So so looking at our staff, our vendors, our peer reviewers. So I think that's been a focus for us. And then on the journal side, our editorial offices are all operating independent of the press. A few of our journals are owned by the press, but by and large, they're at other institutions. So so I think we've usually given them a good bit of bandwidth in terms of who's on their editorial boards, who they're publishing. But what we're starting to see is more editorial offices expressing interest in, for example, collecting demographic information about submissions and figuring out ways that we can support that. And then also just actively asking our editorial offices, are there ways that we can better support you in recruiting papers and things like that. So so I think it's been a little different on the two different sides of the press. But yeah, I would like to see us make more progress in that area.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And Rebecca?
Well, you could probably say as much about RIT as I can, Laverne. I'm gratified to see that these conversations are part of every hiring process that we have. One of the priorities in candidates that we look at is diversity. We are trying to think more broadly about what qualifications really matter. And sometimes, to go back to Jocelyn's comments earlier on, do they have the skills necessary to learn what they would need to do the job? So again, it's the in the humanities, it's different from engineering, and I have seen concerted effort time and time again to broaden our candidate base, and we still struggle with the disparity between the number of female and Alana candidates that we've got, and the fact that engineering as a discipline is not necessarily always welcoming to more diverse candidates. So we continue to try.
I agree. Well stated, Rebecca. Now, in the question and answer feature, there are a couple of very specific questions to our panelists. And the first question is for Seretha. And that question is, I would like to know what your grants consisted of and how these grants were awarded.
Oh, yeah. So it's called the RISCA grant, and it's an internal grant. And we had to go through our grants office. We had to put together a proposal with a budget, and it had to be approved through the grants office, and then it went to a panel. And so the great thing about this grant was that it paid my salary for 2 months in the summer. Oh, we don't have sabbaticals here. We don't. And we typically are teaching in the summer. So this was the first summer in I don't know when that I didn't have to teach a class so that I can pay my bills. So it freed me up so that I didn't have to worry about my bills. And then it also gave me money. I think I got about $5,000 to go and do research. I was supposed to go to archives. I was not able to do that because everything got shut down. I'm always grateful to the librarians. I called librarians and they scrambled and they got me some stuff and sent it to me digitally. But I still, have that money, and I'm hoping that I will be able to use that. So the big thing was that it paid my salary for 2 months, and I didn't have to actually, and it wasn't it was like my for real salary, like what I would get in a month. It wasn't a portion of my salary. And it also paid the benefits, like the insurance and all the kind of stuff that goes with it. So it covered that. And then and then I had the actual travel money so that I could do that research. So that was amazing. And I wrote everyone and said, this is the first time that I have felt supported in my scholarship. And it was tremendous. And I was just so grateful for it.
Thank you. Now, the next specific question is for Rebecca. And it says in Rebecca's presentation, there were a couple of graphs that seemed more random and did not show a particular trend in either a positive or negative direction. I was wondering what can contribute to some of the outliers or randomness in these charts. Also, I was wondering if the previous trends in these charts can affect the later progress in any way.
Great question. So in some ways, I mentioned that some of the numbers were so low. I think the Golisano Institute for Sustainability had 2 female faculty members at the time. And with ends like that, you're going to see variations that are, it's not necessarily robust and reliable data on which we can base things. Additionally, the terms of the NSF Advance were really institutional transformation. And transforming an institution is going to be slow. It's sort of the old adage that a therapist will give, is that, you can change an ocean liner a little bit by 2 degrees and you end up somewhere completely different. And I think institutional transformations kind of like that. By degree, you do get changes, but they are slow, and it's a large, RIT is a large organization. The fact that we are having these conversations, to me, I think is really important. And in terms of how this, how the past predicts the future, I think higher education right now in a time of COVID there's so much that's uncertain. And, there have been so many pieces in the New York Times, for example, on how female faculty have disproportionately borne the burden of childcare and education, homeschooling. And I worry about our younger faculty, our younger women faculty who have children, who are still trying to hold themselves to the same standards. And I hope that the institution understands that these are no ordinary days. And what we've seen and all of the things that we've worked towards, and so many people far beyond me have been working towards on RIT's behalf, that commitment is still there. I also think that, the line that we're looking at, when you look at 7 years of data points, you're going to see a lot more in 70 years. And I know for young scholars now, it is different. It is acceptable to have a family. I had advisors in graduate school who said, oh, they told me I shouldn't have children. Things have changed a bit. It is still a challenge. Sorry, that was a long answer, but.
No, that was great. Thank you, Rebecca. Are there any other questions? I don't want the last question to be mine. That's never a good thing. Okay, then I guess it will be mine. What are some resources you share with students to think about these issues? Anyone want to take that on first? Seretha?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Seretha.
I teach women's and gender studies, our 1101 class, Introduction to Women's and Gender Studies. And in those courses, we are constantly kind of talking about these issues of equity and diversity and inclusivity. But, and that's just kind of like the standard, like textbook, and we're going through those different things. But I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about talking about these issues in other classes. And so in my composition classes that I teach, one of the things that I did, which I think is, it was brilliant on my part, I'll take credit for that, was I had them do a policy analysis paper. And I asked them to actually look at the policies, our handbooks, everything at the university, and to evaluate them using like this lens of like diversity, equity, and inclusivity, and to see like what, where we measured up. Oh my goodness, that was the best assignment ever. And those students, I mean, they really lit into the university in a way, and not bad way, but just like, this is, we're teaching these ideas, but then our policies don't align with, what our mission statement is. And so they were able to raise some of those concerns, but just trying to make the students aware. And so I know I could say, hey, you could read such and such and such and such a text, like, and those lists, those bibliographies are out there. But I just wanted to suggest that maybe you start with like primary sources, and looking at the documents around you and looking at practices. Our students raised some very specific issues about like access to restrooms on our campus, and talked to professors, and professors advocated, and we now have gender neutral bathrooms. We also have lactation stations and things like that. Those are some of the things that came out of that kind of a conversation. And to me, just even having like a take action project is even more important than necessarily, what did you read? Although it is important to read and to get scholarship, but in this space, I just wanted to say, hey, maybe having a take action project and look around you and see what you can learn from investigating those documents.
Great, thank you. That's a great idea. I'm sure I know there's a number of faculty who are on this on this webinar who are probably taking those notes. What a great idea. So they're probably going to take that idea. Rebecca or Jocelyn, would you like to add?
I don't know. Most of my work is really supporting faculty. So I don't know that I have much to, I can't say it better. So I'll stick with Seretha.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link in the chat to the blog post that I mentioned in my talk, which is this, these two blog posts on being excluded, the testimonies by people of color in scholarly publishing. I know that our colleagues at the George Washington University has a master's in publishing program. And I know that one of the professors there, John Warren, he has his students read these testimonies. And I would, if I were teaching the testimonies, I know I would workshop, what would you say if you were in the room and this happened? So really doing some role play so that folks are prepared to respond when microaggressions happen in the workplace. So so that's one resource that I would mention.
Great, thank you.
And I'll also say one of the things, and I'll put this link in there, is a resource. It's called the Black Women's Studies Book List, and I'll put that link in as well.
Great, thank you. And I see Rebecca also did put in the previous link that Jocelyn was mentioning. So that's already included in the chat. And this does conclude our session. I would like to thank again our panelists for this fantastic conversation in this particular area. And also like to thank our audience for attending today. Francis, you have been amazing organizing this entire event, so thank you. And Wallace Library for even hosting this event, so thank you. And also, if you haven't already done so, please, please, please do exercise your right to vote. Thank you again, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, our interpreters, for your fantastic work today. Thank you.